Hey everybody, it's your girl Ebony. I am so excited to welcome you for this event tonight, an event that I've been looking forward to for longer than a month, but I've been really geeking out for the past month. So welcome to the latest edition of Women in Film Speaker Series, the series where we bring you illuminating and in-depth conversations with the female creatives bringing the media you love. Tonight, we're going to be talking about all things horror with some of the women responsible for the creeping dread we've been experiencing over the last couple of years on our screens. Please welcome Jennifer Reeder, filmmaker, writer, director on VHS 94, writer, director Marcel Ochoa, writer of Madres, best-selling author, screenwriter Mishna writer of Werewolves Within, and actor and filmmaker Janina, co-writer and director of Stucco. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
So nice to be here.
So nice to be here.
Before we begin, I do want to shout out our longtime partners at the West Hollywood Arts Commission for helping us bring these great programs to you each year. But yeah, let's just dive into it. So I started off and honestly could not stop, even in the prep period, talking about how excited I was for this because I'm such a huge horror fan myself. I love talking about it. I love watching it. I love reading it. I love dissecting it. Just the whole autopsy of the genre I'm fascinated by. But I would love to hear from each of you about your history with horror, whether it's something that you feel have long felt an affinity towards, or if this is like, kind of a new thing, something that you wanted to dabble in recently. Are you a fan? And if you are a fan, what is it about the genre that appeals to you? So Marcel, I'm gonna start with you.
Okay, great. Yes, I'm like you. I love everything horror, all horror. And it started actually at a very young age. It was two things. One, I'm Mexican American. So growing up, you would always hear scary stories from my grandparents from Mexico. So it was always like La Llorona's coming to get you, Cocoy is coming to get you. So you grow up in a very like scary horror environment when you're little. So I already loved legends and horror, and all of that was very scary. And then my parents loved film and TV, so they encouraged always to watch everything. And when I was 4, it's not the most traditional horror film, but I saw Jaws. And what I loved was the fear. I was so terrified. I was so scared, but then I loved the feeling at the end when I survived it. And so like that fear, that scare stayed with me. And so I watched everything growing up, Poltergeist, Exorcist, It. I loved that feeling of like you're going on this really tense, hour and a half journey, but then you survive it at the end. And so it just started at a very, very young age and has continued, all the way through adult, everything that I watch, but also what I really love to write. I love to write horror. And for me personally, I didn't see a lot of Latinas, in horrors growing up. I always thought like, well, where's my culture? And so for me, primarily what I focus with everything I write or direct has something to do with my culture, either a legend or like Madres that I wrote was very important to my community. So that's how I started my love for horror. And then now I put my culture into everything that I do.
Yes, and just a note, if you have not seen Madres, which is part of the Welcome to Blumhouse, it's available on Amazon. It is really just a stunning sort of, presentation of like folklore and myth and, and dread. But in this very just like horror honoring kind of way, but also doing something completely, love it. Janina, I'm just going around my screen clockwise. So what about you? Have you been a long-term horror fan?
No. So I feel like I don't know. Like, I feel like everything that I do now, I came to hella late in my life. I started my life as a classical musician. I was like basically just a weird kid with really big feelings. And then I got lucky and had a great piano teacher that like gave me my process basically and taught me how to channel. And then that's just gone from art form to art form. I think it's really weird that I ended up in front of the camera. It's just all weird. Then 7 years ago, I met my creative partner, and he was like, we were like talking about films that we love. And he was like, so horror. And I was like, yeah, I don't really get it. And he was like, you're an idiot. And he sat me down and he gave me what we now call horror film school. And I just couldn't get enough. And the things that I was most attracted to were anything that was working in like, anything that was not necessarily wearing its analogy on the sleeve, but is very like, we say like 10% more clear, right? So when you walk away, you're just like, I identify because I understand where we are, like what we were trying to say in this film, and the smaller ones, you know, like those are the things that I was super attracted to, and are definitely some of our references now when we're working. And yeah, so I didn't really, I mean, listen, when I was a kid, if you told me when I was a kid that I would have ended up being the person that I am now, I don't think I would have, maybe I would have believed you. Like, yeah, that sounds weird. That tracks. That seems accurate. But yeah, so so I came to it late, but I think it was probably always inevitable. I also just want to say that every single lady here is just such a freaking badass.
Right?
I love all of your work. Madres, like the oh God, the point, like, oh, come on. Like, oh God. Anyway, you know,
thank you.
Werewolves Within is so fun. I can't even stand it. All my friends are in it. It's so good. VHS 94, just with I didn't even know it was getting worked on. Like, I don't know. I didn't hear about it. So like the fact that the legacy was being continued, I was just like, this is, yes. Anyway, it's, I just am happy to meet you via Zoom and that this is happening. I'm going to shut up now. Go ahead. Next.
Listen, I'm just wanted to say, it doesn't matter that you were late to the horror game. You can still sit with us. What matters is that you are here now. You are part of the horror family.
Oh, I'm all the way here now. I mean, like, it's been 7 years of me being very here, but I didn't know what I was missing. Listen, I'm the child of immigrants. You think they were going to let me watch horror films? No, I wasn't allowed to watch them. So, you know, it took me a sec.
Jennifer, what about you?
Well, you know, I mean, I'm the youngest of 5, and there's this like kind of big gap between like the next oldest sibling. And so I think that by the time that I came along, my parents were like, we're going to do and say and watch whatever we want. And then she just has to, you know, be with us while it happens. And so, you know, from a young age, I remember, you know, lots of Friday and Saturday night midnight movie, you know, watching. Probably I fell asleep because I was too young, but like lots of that, like really awesome kind of House of Wax and the original like Willard and all those original kind of like Universal monster movies, you know, seeing them as a kid. And then when I was older, you know, my parents, I mean, it wasn't quite the kind of Night of the Living Dead. It was like the like Young Frankenstein, even potentially, or something like you know, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or a Jaws, or, you know. And I think that my parents were sort of just like, if she gets freaked out and we as parents can't kind of convince her that that's actually a fictional world, then maybe it's our fault as parents. And so I was exposed to a lot of like stuff as a kid, and it never, you know, it didn't affect me negatively. I mean, the thing that affected me the most actually was a much more kind of nuanced film. I remember my mother showing me very young Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca, which is still probably one of my most favorite films. This very nuanced kind of like love triangle that's like anchored by a dead woman, you know. A beautiful film that is, you know, that was based on a novel written by a woman. And you know, all of my films you know, have kind of leaned into the, I don't know, the darker aspects of humanity or the human experience. And, you know, with the exception of very few films, like literally like 2 of them, you know, I have wanted to deal with the experiences of girls and women, you know. And I have also kind of leaned into horror tropes like dead girls, stalked girls, you know. I have tried to, you know, cast authentically, meaning like, what is the authentic world? Who are the final girls? And I think that sense of like, who are the final girls definitely influenced, you know, how I approached you know, VHS 94, which this iteration, which is the 4th iteration of it, you know, myself and Chloe Okuno were, you know, this franchise has never had female directors. And so for this one to have 2 of them, I mean, you know, I'll talk more about sort of my direct experience, you know, with it, but I don't know. Yeah. It's like, you know, I'm dark, and you know, I love my darkness, and I try to impart that into my own children now. Whether or not it sticks, we'll see. But I'm very honored to be also in this room with all the rest of you guys, you ladies, you gals.
Yes, I think there's something so interesting about horror that's really wrestling with the history and the tropes of the genre, that's made by, folks who traditionally have perhaps been like the subject of horror, right? Like the dead bodies within the horror, the flesh upon which the story is told, what happens when, they're in charge of the camera and in charge of the narrative. But we'll come back to that. Mishna, what about you? What's your history with horror?
It was always on when I was growing up. I feel like there wasn't like a really great childcare plan, and sometimes we get dropped off at the lady who lived behind our house, and she took care of like 7 kids at a time and had cable, because we all stole cable. I just remember her rusty swing set out back, and and then some poltergeist on in the house. And I'm talking about like preschool.
Wow.
So there was just always, and I didn't like it, but I did like it. It was like that whole thing. But I feel like my real connection to it was Grimm's. Like when I first started hearing these Grimm's fairy tales, because inevitably they were sort of cautionary tales to women, or a lot of them were. But when you connect the dots, like a lot of those fairy tales were actually stolen from women, like Grimm's, and a lot of those original fairy tales that were sort of collected and anthologized were like, oh yeah, there's a French lady in a tavern who, if you buy her a drink, will tell you like 8 stories. And a lot of them were about like things that would really affect women's lives in huge ways, like who you marry, or be careful of that divorcee with the good carriage. Sort of like, if someone gives you a key, don't go in the room. And I feel like I was always really drawn to those. And it sort of always stuck with me. And then of course the films of John Carpenter, which were like, my love affair. I watched all of them. I would look at that screen and be like, who's Deborah Hill? Who is she? Because she co-wrote a lot of them with John Carpenter. And I saw They Live when I was like eight or 9 in the theater. And just the fact it was
in
like
a theater, not even at the lady's house behind your house.
No, I was older then. I could go to the theater.
How did you get to the theater at 8 to watch They Live?
Oh, my stepdad took me.
We had very different childhoods.
Very different. I can tell. I might have been a piano prodigy.
It's not that cool.
Yeah, but I just remember seeing like this social satire and and just being like, oh, I get this. Like this I get. And Keith David and Rowdy Roddy Piper, and not a lot of women, but the messaging was really something that was so fun and interesting to me, and campy and big. And
yeah. So I want to talk about, horror as a genre throughout this conversation, but I also want to make sure that we spend a lot of time talking about your respective projects. So I would love to hear from all of you about like the genesis of the projects that we're, sort of focusing on tonight. So Madres, Stucco, VHS 94, Werewolves Within, and anyone can sort of jump in here, but I would love to, just hear like, how long had you been kicking around this idea? What sort of sparked the idea? If you were, sort of hired to come on and do this, how did you sort of wrestle with the development of it? Just, walk us through how these stories got told, and anyone can jump in and get started.
I guess I'll start with Madres. So that one is such a specific story because it was based on a true story of what was happening to migrant women in California in the 70s. And I didn't know that story. I was researching Mexican-American history in the US for a different project. And then I came upon, a little part in a book I was reading about what was happening to these migrant women. And then I was like, I did as much research as I could. I watched a documentary. And so that was about 5 years ago when that first inception I started that. It's been sort of a long journey to get it sold and get it made. And there was COVID. And so I was so glad that it actually got made. but it was something very important to me that I wanted to do it as a horror. I could have done it as a drama, but I felt like I wanted to reach a broad audience, and actually what was happening to this woman was a horror. The actual what humans can do to one another, that is the real horror. And so that was basically the inception of how that idea came along. And I worked backwards of, I knew where I wanted to end up. I knew the twist ending. I knew it was going to be based in reality. And then I had to work backwards of, how do you make it now into a horror story to bring this audience on the ride and then educate them in the very end. So it was an interesting process working backwards.
Mishna, what about you?
I was in a women's fellowship, and Werewolves Within is actually a video game.
Mhm.
I happen to love video games, and I got this killer fellowship from Ubisoft where they're like, you want to come in and play a bunch of video games, and we'll pay you to pitch on them. And they were really trying to get their woman game going there.
Mhm.
And you know, there's a lot of really smart women that work there. And you know, I played this game, which is not a horror game at all. But I saw the, you know, the sort of Thunderdome of the situation that could be like a really fun horror comedy. And I think, you know, when I was not interested in making a self-serious werewolf movie. There are people out there that would make one. For me, it's like the supernatural monster thing is always really fresh for comedy. I was thinking about like Shaun of the Dead, and I was thinking about like The Thing, and these really fun sort of comedic movies that had some jump scares and some suspense and some dark corners and some creaky doorways. And I saw the opportunity too in it for an unexpected heroine that maybe we've not seen before in this kind of movie. So I always started with the sort of feminist agenda.
Right on. Mm-hmm.
And it was just ripe. I thought it was just super ripe. So I brought it to them, my concept, and they were like, that's gold, let's go. And, you know, I wrote a first draft, and they said, we're going to make this. And I was like, okay, you know, and then, you know, lo and behold, a year later, we're in production. So, you know, it just kind of came together.
Yeah. Yeah. Jennifer, what about you?
So I would say, you know, with VHS 94 in particular, I came onto that project really late in the game, like literally like March of 2021. So David Bruckner, who is part of the whole kind of original franchise, he was supposed to direct the wraparound. He got pulled off to direct Hellraiser. And then, I mean, I would like to think I was the first director that they turned to after David Bruckner pulled away. I have no idea who else they spoke to. I don't want to know.
We're going to just say that this is truth. This is the narrative we're going with it. End of story.
Yeah.
Do you know that Jennifer was the first director that they turned to when he was unavailable?
That's what I heard.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
totally.
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I heard too. And it's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of inherited two different scripts from that project. One that was written by David Bruckner, one that was written by Simon Barrett. Neither one of them were all that fleshed out. And the two of them know that, you know, like they would say that also. So would the producers. And so I said, you know, like I would love to be able to, you know, just rewrite the wraparound. I mean, having said that, I came in so late in the game that Chloe's section had already been written or had already been shot actually. And Simon and Ryan's section were going into production like within 72 hours. Like parts of the production were already moving, and some of those other shorts in the anthology had these kind of connections back to this idea of like a SWAT team that raids what I think is a like a drug super lab, and it turns into something else. So, you know, it's not, I've had the kind of the privilege, I guess, of being able to direct so much of what I've written or write what I've directed, vice versa, you know, and in that kind of I've like authored my own sort of like so many of my own films. So it was, I mean, I was able to kind of rewrite the wrap, but I did have this kind of like half of a log line, and I inherited a cast, which included these two women. In both Simon and David's script, the two women had very different kind of like arcs. And so, from my perspective, I was like, great, yeah, those are my final girls. Let's just like figure out how they become the kind of like, heroines, and I don't know, maybe the villains also, the protagonists and antagonists of this. And I was deeply influenced by David Cronenberg's Videodrome. I was just really thinking about the VHS franchise in general. And, I have never done an anthology. I've never done a found footage project. So I just was thinking about, the kind of meta-ness of it and what I could bring to it. And the idea of a kind of, like a feminist Videodrome, or the idea of sort of like, and I really am not spoiling anything, but the idea of like, kind of like rogue lady SWAT officers who, are potentially at the end of the day responsible for the entire, all of the tapes in the VHS world. That was, I mean, I had no problem, proposing that kind of ambition. I think that's not exactly what shows up on the screen necessarily, but I get that, the wraparound, when I decided to attach myself to the wraparound for VHS 94, so many people came out of the woodwork and were like, the wraparound is really hard to do. Nobody likes the wraparound, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's still true. I think that the wraparound has to truly be in service to the other shorts. And so there's things that got cut out of my wraparound that I get, I was sad to see them go. I think it diminishes the wraparound. However, I also think that, at the end of the day, it's in service to the other shorts. And there's, I actually really love all the other, shorts in this one. And I love that, the VHS super fans are really loving it. And I actually think that there's, a lot of final girls in this VHS 94. I just think that sort of like that whole franchise has kind of turned a corner and has become very modern. But I would just say, like, very briefly, like kind of leading up to VHS 94, like I wouldn't have been asked to be attached to the project if I hadn't made something like Knives and Skin, or I hadn't made the shorts leading up to that. And I've got, another Shudder original coming up too. And it's not so much that, I feel like my kind of brand is a certain kind of horror, but I think that it's, again, like what I said previously, it's like I want to, I really love the idea of like using genre, and in particular, horror or thriller, as a kind of a curtain, where you can kind of open it up and the audience enters a story that could be about empowerment, consent, racism, sexism. I mean, I just really feel like, and I'm sure that all of us on this, in this Zoom room have been asked this question recently, like, why do you think so many women or people of color or queer people are making, these kind of genre moves? And we're like, it's actually always been happening.
They've always been making it. You just noticed.
Exactly. It's always been a space for transgression. Mm-hmm. It's always been a place for transgression. It's always been a place to expose oppression. It's always been a place to lean into the surreal, which is a place where you can really get into the internal, which is where we actually understand the origins of bias and discrimination, and sometimes it's packaged in a schlocky, zombie, low budget. And sometimes it's packaged into something like, Get Out, but it's, this is not new. And I always love to say, let us please not forget that the most famous monster was written by a teenage girl. Mary Shelley released Frankenstein when she was 19 years old. And so from my perspective, I'm always kind of just like, make no mistake, you know, women own horror.
Oh, we could spend like an hour on Gothic horror.
Oh yeah, I mean, when you're talking about someone who hangs around in a crowd where people are having sex on people's gravestones, like these people are about it, you know, like they are unafraid to sort of go deep. There's so much that I want to unpack there, but Janina, I do want to talk to you about Stucco and like the genesis of that. So
Sure.
for those of you who don't know, VHS 94 is an anthology film. Jennifer has, you know, talked about doing the wraparound for it, and you have these very just really stunning, you know, and very different, you know, horror shorts throughout. And so that leads me to you, Janina, and shorts, and what it is about like the horror short that can be so effective. Marcella, you've also done horror shorts. You know, when you're talking about that condensed, you know, 5 to 17 minutes or, you know, whatever, right? And having to weave a narrative in there that has to do so very much, you know, it's really a phenomenal amount of, you know, of work to make that happen. So can you talk a little bit about Stucco?
Yeah, sure. So my artist mission statement is I am here to examine the parts of ourselves that we are not proud of. It's pretty specific. And I carry it out over into any medium I'm working in, any job I have, right? And there are so many things in my life that I am just cringing over constantly that I'll just never have, I'll never run out of things to unpack about myself and life and everything around me, right? So Russo is my creative partner. We both went through very difficult years independently. In 2018 was really, really hard for us personally. And we kind of picked ourselves up and put it into a piece that we called Stucco. I shot it here in this house. The whole ending sequence was shot right here. And I basically took a check from the morning show and I put it into producing the short film. I put myself in it. Like I just called all my friends, you know, like we all do, just you figure out how to make the thing. And it was really hard. It was really, really hard emotionally because every single corner of that thing is hyper specific to us in sometimes the same way, sometimes different ways. And when we sort of like went out into the festival world, the thing that we were most proud of is that people would come up to us and say that they identified in really strange ways. I don't want to ruin it, but well, whatever, just watch it. Just watch the end. The ending is like, if you actually identify with this ending, then like we can be homies. Like you are like down to admit some shit to yourself. And it's really, you know, it's just sort of, it's also was really important to us to explain, to show our voice without having to explain it. Cause, you know, there's art and there's industry, right? So like, I do want to be very clear to everybody watching. We can talk about the art part, but now what I'm going to say is very industry related, just career wise. Where we were was that we had gotten really close to a lot of sales, but in the end, we hadn't actually shot anything. We hadn't like shown anyone that we could deliver polish, that we understood how to direct people, and that and to really explain what our voice is. The other strange thing about the industry, I think we're hopefully like moving away from that very soon, is that as a brown girl, as soon as I walk into a room, people expect me to hand them something about brown girls. And I'm like, there are so many other things that I would like to talk about besides just the one kind of brown girl thing that I happen to be, you know, there's just a lot that, that I'd like to talk about. Don't put me in, please don't marginalize me further. Please don't only allow me to tell stories about the specific kind of brown I am. How dare you, you know? So it was really important to show that what we were, what we want to do is specific, you know, no one had seen anything from us. So we took something that was like the most emotionally difficult one to make, and we just did that. And that was hard but freeing.
Yeah, I think, you pointed out something that has traditionally been a huge stumbling block for women, for people of color, for disabled filmmakers, right? Which is that we are burdened with the expectation that all of our work will be autobiographical. And that's really all people want from us, which is not to say there's anything wrong with that work.
No, by the way, like the feature that we're working on right now is based on a Hindu myth. It is gnarly. It is so fucked up. I can't wait to make it. And I'm so excited to use something from my culture, but don't only allow me to do that.
Right.
How dare you?
Exactly, right? And so I wonder if this is part of the reason why we traditionally haven't been perceived to be part of certain kinds of genre, which is, so if you are only allowing, cis white men to have access to like a cultural imagination, then of course you're not going to assume that a brown woman, a Mexican woman, a queer kid, is going to have as much to say.
Mm-hmm.
But of course we know that's a lie.
But the thing is that we are in a great moment, because there have been leaps and bounds in the last 10 years. There are so many people that haven't had a shot before that have gotten a shot and have stuck the landing. And in the next few years, it's just going to be a different place.
Yeah. So I want to go back to something you were talking about, Jennifer, which is at its worst, or rather at its best, horror can be really revelatory and transgressive. At its worst, it's still illuminating, because it's sort of starting to spotlight on perhaps like, the fissures and the cracks in our cultural contract. What are the things that you are most excited about doing in your particular horror? And all of you have sort of, talked about this a little bit, but I would love to hear whether it's in, your latest work, something that you have coming up, but what is something that you keep returning to that you feel like horror offers a really just, abundant toolbox for exploring that? Mishna, what
well, I mean, I think I come down, I think I come back again and again to redemption, and I don't know why, but that seems to be a through line in my and things I'm working on. And I can't talk about it, but the story I'm writing right now is a redemption story. I tend to like the idea that people can change, and that second chances are worthwhile. So, I mean, and sort of the horror genre in general sets up redemption so well, because usually it starts with a little original sin. Whether it's like not listening to the Swede and shooting the dog, or not giving the crone who comes into the bank for a loan forgiveness, and then there's these overblown consequences for it. So I mean, I think that's one of the themes I like a lot in horror. There's sort of like this very biblical idea of punishment in it too. And the idea of fairness always comes into play. And I like playing with the wages of sin in film. It's something that's really, and in storytelling, it's something that's really gratifying to me to see, where those scales tip and where they balance, and what kind of bargains we're willing to make as people, and whether we can like someone, or whether or not they can come back from making a horrendous deal, or these sort of demonic deals with the devil, whether or not we can let them back in our good grace, or we can like them again, as part of the journey.
Yeah. So Jennifer, I started off by saying that I was going to come back to you, and then I skipped over you and went to Mishna. What about you?
Well, since kind of the very first film that I've made, I love to be able to identify the thing that someone projects onto you, the idea that someone projects onto you, which that other person identifies as your weakness, and then you actually turn that around, and it is your, like, your superpower, and so, I think that so many of my films, and the one that I'm gonna shoot in March of 2022 is about this idea in particular of the way that we use the idea of kind of like wild and out of control for teenage girls who have or even women, adult women, but who have agency over their life, agency over their sexuality, agency over their anger, anything. And that there are phrases, terms that we use to diminish agency in women, and that the idea of what if this wild and out of control girl actually became wild and out of control, I mean, that sense of like, be careful what you not wish for, but be careful what you've sort of like determined is your way of diminishing someone's identity. And that's actually always been the stories that I have just not my own stories I love to consume in literature, in films, in music, in like any creative form, all of those stories where where the idea that that you tell me, you are saying this thing to me as a way of diminishing me, and I'm going to take, it's like, I don't know, it's like a childish playground kind of moment, like I am rubber and you're glue, and anything that you say bounces off me and sticks onto you. My fourth grader the other day was like, that's really stupid, and I was like, no, it's not. Think about that for a minute. But I think that my films have always been really about women and girls finding power in that moment where you're like, oh, okay, you think I'm crazy? I'll show you crazy. Oh, you think I bleed a lot once a month? I'm going to show you blood. Oh, you think I'm afraid of walking home alone at night? I'm going to show you what fear looks like. All of this stuff, or I'm going to, you think that I feel, that I know that I cry bias. Oh, I'm going to show you bias. Like, I mean, really, like, those are the kind of stories that I lean into, even as a consumer. And so, because I do feel like that at the end of the day, I mean, I want to make films that are entertaining, but I want to make films, that inspire that audience to kind of like, while they're driving home, be like, yeah. There's something here that I can sew into my skin. I know this in my skin. That feels real and authentic. And I can move forward, with the permission to do all of that. So, that's also, I mean, that's where I just, the idea that it just makes me crazy, the idea that, that there is some sort of like race, gender, class, able, whatever, who sort of like owns horror, I mean, I'm like, we're reclaiming territory, that has been ours for a long time. I challenge anybody, and I'm not being binary here, but I mean, I'm challenge anybody to sort of talk about, the, body horror, like, I mean, I've had 3 children. There's nothing more genre than childbirth. I mean, I could have really, I mean, but maybe that's another conversation. All I'm saying is, like, again, I said it before, like, we own horror.
Yeah. Okay. So, we do these conversations. We always look for like a 30-second soundbite. Childbirth is genre, definitely in the running there. Absolutely. Marcel, what about you? What's a through line in sort of like your horror art and journey? Something that you keep returning to.
One of the things that I've been focusing on lately and what I did with Madres was this social justice type horror, but through a horror lens. And when I saw Get Out, that was what really had sparked me. I'm like, oh, I love how they did this. I love that you can kind of tell a different story with horror, but it's still horror. And I'd always been thinking of like, this something, I want to do something like that, something in that vein. And when I came across this story, I was like, this is what I want to write. This is the story I want to tell, but through a horror lens. And I continued with my latest short that I wrote and directed about domestic violence towards women. And I did it, again, through a horror lens. You have 10 minutes to tell this story. Like, it's so difficult in the short to tell a whole full story, but you can tell powerful things within, 10 minutes. You can tell these powerful stories and these issues that maybe aren't really talked about, or domestic violence, or female reproductive rights as a madres, immigrant rights, racism, all this. Those are things that I love to explore, and it's not always what I'm going to do. I just found myself recently doing that through a horror lens and sort of retelling it and doing it different and twist through the horror genre. But I find that I never saw stuff like that growing up, and I never saw anything kind of being talked about or in this sort of way, in that sort of lens. I guess it's different from just a straight drama. I think there's something interesting that you can do with the horror twist, and like what Jennifer was saying, you want your audience to talk about it in the car on the way home. Like, you just don't want them to see a film and then leave, and 10 minutes later they've forgotten what they've seen. But to be able to really resonate with that audience and talk about it and stay with them where they're still talking about it a few days later after that car ride home, that's the kind of stuff that I love to do. And that's recently the projects that I've been really focusing on. They're really sticking with the audience for multiple reasons. And I think horror is just a great way to get a lot of those issues and these we never really talk about or see, is a great lens to talk about this. So that's lately what I've been really focusing on. And always the strong female heroine, of course. It's always going to be something very feminist. Something that I always, I always wanted to see those stories. So it's always going to be a strong female heroine, whether, her journey of how she gets there. But for sure, that's one of the things I always write or direct, is going to be that strong female character lead.
So let's talk about like the craft of making something scary, right? Writing something scary, I would love to hear from anyone here about like, what is it like to sit down and write something and know that you have to hit certain kind of like emotional beats, for it to be effective. And whether that's in something that's short form, whether it's in long form, whether it's something that's a horror comedy like Werewolves Within, which despite being hilarious also has like really effective like jump scares and goriness to it, right? So what is it like what is it, what are the ingredients, and how are you manipulating those to actually generate the effect that you're trying to get at?
The stuff that is the deepest, darkest secrets of the things I don't like about myself, or the things that maybe nobody's talking about. And they can be really big political concepts too, right? But how they affect you in a really intimate level, that kind of place to start. The thing that just makes you like deeply unsettled, that is what I'm trying to roll my sleeves up and get into. There's goo in the thing I was putting my hands into there, just so you know. But that's the starting point, right? It's like, what just makes me deeply unsettled? What is going to make me need to talk to my therapist? What is going to, and the thing is that then sort of using genre as the horror genre as a Trojan horse to unpack that is really the exciting part, right? How do I tell this in a way that if but if you don't, you're still going to have a great time holding the hand of the person who knows. That is then the grand magic trick that you try to figure out, right? But starting with a feeling or a subject that is dark and personally upsetting is really where I like to start.
And what about like the mechanics of it too? Mishna?
Well, I come from comedy, and comedy is a lot about surprise. I did stand-up for 10 years, and that was sort of my introduction to storytelling. Oh, okay.
10 years.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of what I played with there is setup. and drawing out moments and seeing how long you can hold someone in the pocket before you give a release. And it's a lot about building tension and release and building tension and release and faking left and going right and surprise. And so I feel like a lot of those same mechanics apply to horror. It's just being used in a different way. It's literally the opposite. With horror, you're building tension. With comedy, you're breaking tension. So I feel like for me, it just stems from this like sort of sick part of myself that wants to make other people feel something, which is kind of what entertainment is, isn't it? But I want to control how you feel on a moment-to-moment basis.
Yeah, and I mean, horror and comedy are so perfect for that, and like perfectly suited for that, right? They're not diametrically opposed in any sense. And you think about how they both operate and the way that they physically change us in a moment. In horror, the way we shrink, we curl up into ourselves, we gasp, etc. With comedy, whether we're laughing out loud, our body is shaking. It is uncommon in other genres to have that kind of physical reaction in the way that we do for both horror and comedy. So I love what you're saying there about like the tension and release. And
it's also wanting that gratifying from an audience. Like you want to get something from your audience that is physical, audible, visible. It's really a different kind of viewing you're asking for from people. Or you're forcing out of them. And I think I kind of get off on it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Jennifer, Marcel, you wrote Madres, did not direct it, but you wrote it, but you have directed horror before. And Jennifer, directed the wraparound for VHS 94, tons of other stuff. What sort of, things are like, what are you doing when you get on set or before you get on set, but to plan to make things scary, whether it's, lighting, it's, the music and everything, but how are you sort of, navigating what needs to be done to set an atmosphere of fear?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's different when I know I'm just writing something, I'm not going to direct it, and then it's different when I'm directing. So for Madres, just writing, it was making sure the scare was on the page, but it was starting with the characters of, if you don't care about these characters, you're not really scared for it. You're not really scared for this pregnant woman if you're not invested. And so it was, for me, it was most important of getting the characters down. Like the script you have to go on this journey and really love them. And then building in the beats of like, okay, well, where does this scare need to be? This feels good. And so it's sometimes work backwards with that. But it's making sure it's on the paper. So then the director can film that. Then we have, music is so huge with horror and those jump scares and those beats. So on the page, I need to make sure it's there to hand it off to the director. And then for my short that I directed, it's called Worry Dolls, and it just premiered on Crypt TV for anyone who wants to see it. But for that one, I was doing everything because I wrote it, I directed, I produced it, I ended up co-editing it with my producing partner at the end. I ended up acting in it. It was just sort of like everything. I was doing set design. And so I was prepping that, and I had the most amazing DP, also Latina. So it was wonderful. I was trying to like have, as many strong women around me as I can for heads of department. But for the scares, it would like accurately shooting a jump scare so people will get scared. And I research a lot where I'll watch a lot of horror films and see which jump scares I like. How did they shoot it? How did they do it? And what we found with Worry Dolls was doing like this one long take where you don't think anything is there, where she looks into the closet, nothing's there, and then something jumps out and you don't cut. And that was the biggest scare that we got. Like when we premiered it at Los Angeles Latino Film Festival, everyone jumped and screamed. And then having like a little bit of levity after that, and there's a little laughter later. There was like this jump scare and then, levity after. And those were, it was just different. It's totally different for writing versus actually when you're on set and making sure you kind of nail a scare. And then in the editing process, making sure the music and the sound effects are so important on those scares. That's kind of my process.
Yeah. Jennifer, what about you?
Well, with VHS 94, so we shot in an enormous warehouse, just in a little town outside of Toronto, Canada. And that warehouse was a labyrinth of darkness, and smells of death. I mean, literally there were like, at some point, you know, we're like, something definitely is dead in here. And somebody found like a raccoon, I mean, it was just, and our shooting days, because of the warehouse was very dark, but there were also parts of the warehouse that had like kind of ceiling lighting. And so, and we wanted to have the whole thing like in darkness. So our call time was 1 p.m. and then we would wrap at 1 a.m. And so, you know, I mean, I think that once the actual sun goes down and you are in a gigantic warehouse that even in May in Toronto was like chilly, we could see our breath and you could sometimes smell dead animals. And there was a night also there was an actual raccoon in the space too. And it was easy to kind of get lost in that space. And there was no running water. I mean, we had like this very elaborate kind of like portable toilet thing that was very nice. But I mean, it was just the space itself. And I love the space, but the space itself just felt like there were ghosts there. You know, we definitely felt like there were ghosts there. And so I didn't have to, you know, I think we were all a little bit like, maybe everybody find a buddy. Does everyone have a buddy to just stand next to? I mean, even with COVID, you know, not too close, 6 feet apart, but find your buddy. You know, how will you find your way out of here? And then you know, I turned around and I shot another film, which is another Shudder original called Night's End, here in Chicago over 13 days, which is a ghost story about a guy, like a newly divorced single dad who moves into a new apartment in a new town to kind of find a new start. And his new apartment is haunted. And the production designer and the entire art team was very superstitious, which just like that kind of energy just permeated all of us. So for instance, you know, one of the characters in this film is a kind of professional exorcist. So, you know, the production designer and the art team had raided an occult store on the north side of Chicago, but they would not bring any of the candles, iconography, little trinkets, anything into the house. Like they kept everything into the garage, you know, thinking that like, you know, because the art team, typical of an art team, would, you know, like was working all through the night, you know, in this apartment building. And they were convinced everyone else that the actual apartment was potentially haunted, and that bringing any kind of, you know, occult, you know, iconography, objects, anything, you know, would kind of shift the you know, the paranormal temperature in the, you know, in the room. And, you know, things that probably normally happen on a set, like all of a sudden a light goes out, or all of a sudden everyone's kind of quiet because we're getting ready to roll and there's a weird noise. Nor if you're like doing a romantic comedy or something, nobody would think of it. But if you're doing a ghost story, a haunted story, a scary, all of a sudden everyone's like, all right, cut, hold on. You know, like, I mean, at some point, I mean, it was a very, very quick, like 13-day shoot. But at some point I was like, do we need a ghost whisperer on set? Like, do we need someone else on set to sort of like move forward? But, you know, I mean, I think that, I mean, I sort of love when the even if it's very scary, you know, the sort of like the tone of the film permeates just the general, you know, vibe of the film. I mean, having said that, of course, you know, I do not actively invite, you know, ghosts or any kind of apparitions or any evil spirits, you know, onto my set. And I think that, you know, one just quick thing that I'll say that was related to something else that you had asked Ebony was about kind of like, how do you maybe shoot kind of scary stuff? And in VHS 94 in particular, there's a scene towards the end that's a kind of proper sort of like bludgeoning. And that's not something that I have done before. But I knew that that's kind of what's expected in the VHS realm, VHS franchise. You know, it's gore, like people, it's gory. And so I had to sort of figure out like, well, how do I justify the gore? How do I lead up to the gore? And then how do I make everyone, on set and the actors kind of comfortable with that gore, how to actually make it even sort of like fun and justifiable. And I mean, even if it's like really over the top, and that wasn't difficult to do, but I thought about that a lot leading up to shooting that, because I'm not someone who as a consumer is, loves that kind of horror where it's just sort of like, bodily, gory, that kind of like gratuitous violence. I mean, I love a kind of something that's more psychological, but knowing that I had to, sew myself into, this train that had left the station, so to say, with a franchise where the fans really wanted, decapitations and, the like, I also had to write the wraparound to not justify it, because I wouldn't say that there's a justification for that sort of like violence, but to contextualize it. Maybe that's the better word. Anyway.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love all of that. I also love that you emphasize that you don't invite apparitions or spirits onto your set. Just letting folks know, not to say they aren't welcome, but they have not been invited there. So if they show up, it was under their own steam. We'll figure it out once we get to it. Okay, so we just have a couple of minutes left, and I do want to get to at least one audience question. So I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I apologize if I'm not, but Sean Smith wants to know, how did you find your crew? So for those of you who are, help put together crews for these, but also any pro tips for the genre. So breaking in, you're a horror writer, you'd like to get your work out there. You are, a rising horror director, you're a horror producer, things that you can share with the audience, like, hey, if this is something that you're passionate about, here are the, companies and the people, who are looking for stories, or here are the kind of stories that seem like they're really resonating with people right now. Anything that you want to share. Marcella, can we start with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, it's always Blumhouse. They're the go-to people for me. They're always looking for horror, and I'm so glad they took a chance. I have to be grateful to Blumhouse and Amazon, but also what I found on the short side as well, Crypt TV. So one of the things I wanted to do was grow my director reel, because I've written a lot, but I really want to focus on directing. And so for me, I just used like the pennies that I had in my budget, all cast and crew that I've known over the years from working in the industry. So DP, I know that's really great. All the crew I knew and all the cast, and just did a short for my reel. And then, Crypt TV ended up liking it and distributing it. But one of the things I wanted to do was just really not wait for someone to give me money, because no one's going to give you money to like shoot just a little thing. Like, I was able to proactively try and do something, or proactively write my script to sell it. And, it took 2 years to sell, but when it did, it was great. And it took off from there. But on my end, I was trying to proactively, every time I have downtime, is either writing something or trying to shoot something. So I'm ready for that. When I get that big studio job to direct it, I have this reel. So that was just something that, in my downtime, I'm always trying to do something that I tell people, either if you're writing, always try writing something. And try and get it to these companies that really focus on horror, and there are quite a few of them. So. Awesome. And also festivals I think are a great way. Those horror festivals are a fantastic way. If you can get your script or your short or your film in there, it's a great way to get noticed.
Absolutely. Mishna, what about you? Any pro tips?
Well, I'm a writer only at this point. But I would say that, if you can come up with something that's a few people in a few rooms, that's always a great tip. The great thing about horror is it doesn't take a ton of money to make something pop. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why it's been such an inroad for so many women. It's got the great life or death stakes that a lot of women's stories don't get to have. But at the same time, you can make it in a couple rooms with a few people. And if you can come up with a concept that's really compact, it's easier to get that first financing.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Janina, what about you?
Stay lean, and start with the short, and don't worry about making it big or fancy. Just focus on your concept and what you're trying to say. Just the work of saying one thing clearly is very hard. So just do that. Choose one thing to say and do it clearly. And honestly, it's even okay if you see the seams. It's fine, because what you're trying to say is the most important thing, and it will get you very far, because people will see that earnestness and that clarity, and you'll, they will find you.
Awesome. Jennifer, you want to take us out with your pro tips?
Well, look, I always say short films are people too. And I've made a lot of short films, and I couldn't agree more with what everyone has said, that I think, do not discount the short films. I think there's a sort of a sad story in US based filmmaking, where a short film is tended to see, or thought of as like a calling card for a feature. And it's not so much the case, like outside of the US, but I think that, you can make a terrifying 3-minute film with, like we all have like actually awesome cameras on our phones, and, there is open source software for video editing and sound design, etc. I mean, and it doesn't have to be exhausting to do all that stuff by yourself. Actually, there's some incredible films, short films, that have been sort of like authored in that kind of, vacuum of like a one person band, so to say. And I couldn't agree more with the film festivals. I mean, I am someone who has made my visibility through film festivals, and right now there's genre film festivals all over the world. And it's a rolling call for kind of like, give me your films. And genre festival programmers and the genre press, I find, are absolute cinephiles.
Yeah.
I mean, these are people who love films, who know film history, who read, who go to, who like look at art, who listen to like all sorts of kind of music. I mean, it's a really, really rich community. And it's a community that's always looking for sort of just like, yeah, hey, at the after, party in the lobby, like, what do you do? Like, what are you up to? Here's my card, then you follow up. And it's not, there's no quick path between like 0 and like the hot tub with people in bikinis and crystal or whatever. I don't know what your fantasy is. That's actually not my fantasy. I honestly, but you know what I mean? I think that there's like, for some people, it's just going to like, how do I get there very fast? And that's, you don't really, you actually don't. You put in the work and you make films because you love to make films. You tell stories because you love to tell stories, and you make connections with people, and you are not a jerk, and you say, you do what you said you will do,
and then you earn your own hot tub, and then you invite your friends to get in your hot tub.
I mean, I'm all about like the crystal, but I don't know, it doesn't necessarily have to be in a hot tub per se, but I mean, I'll take it. I'm just saying that's like, it's about like kind of like doing the work, making the connections, following through, understanding that rejection and no, and I'm not sure, or like, let's see what happens in the next round, is also part of it. That's what I still experience that all the time. I get a lot of yeses, but I get a lot of like, I don't know, or like, nope, or like, hell no. And, it's like, that is actually, the name of the game. And I also think that this is, I don't want to take up some more space, but, I do think that like we are, a group of, female identified women, and, women of color, and, queer women. I'm not sure what this whole makeup is, but I do think that it's very important to understand that, to acknowledge that it could be, it will be a more steep incline.
Mm-hmm.
And you're worth it, and you can do it. you can do it. And, we are all here to make that change. And we are all here from my perspective, personally, I am here to get up to that part of that incline and turn around and see other people, who are further down and pull them up. I didn't have mentors when I was a young filmmaker. I had to kind of like look and be like, oh, I don't know these other female filmmakers, other queer filmmakers, other women of color, blah, blah, blah. But I love those films and they made that film. So maybe I can make that film. But now I feel like I'm at a time in my career when part of my obligation to my own life is to turn around, and be like, okay, I'm in a position to kind of like pull you up to make it actually easier. I so often say that I came to the place where I am in the film industry by like kicking in the basement window. I mean, that's not the easiest way to get into the house, for real. But now that I'm like in the house and I'm on the front porch, I'm in a position to be like, oh yeah, you can come in the front, you can come in the front door. So anyway, that was a kind of a long way of saying, just kind of like put in the work and make connections, keep connections, and keep working. And be a good steward of this world. And yeah, thank you for this conversation tonight. It was like rad.
This was so great. Thank you all for being here, for just really thoughtful, insightful answers about your work, about the genre as a whole. I couldn't have asked for like a better roundtable on this topic, which is so close to my heart. Thank you to everyone who's in the room for us. Thank you to everyone who's watching on YouTube. Thank you to everyone who's watching the recording after the fact. We will let everyone know, like we'll follow up and make sure that you have links to everyone's their work, short films, their films, etc. We will make sure that you are able to get to know the work of all of these incredible filmmakers, because you really want to watch these films. So good.
I just want to say one thing to everybody that's out there. If you want to make a thing, make your thing, whether you have $2 or 2 million, don't be afraid to ask people to help you. You're going to need help. A lot of people out there want to get weird. Don't be afraid to ask.
I can't think of a better way to end than a lot of people want to get weird. Everyone have a fantastic night. Panelists, thank you all again so much. Marcella, Jennifer, Janina, Mishna, thank you all. This was fantastic. Good night, everyone.